Message today is titled Blind from Birth. And I think you'll find there's something here today that applies to everybody. Blind from birth. You know, I thought we're probably going to divide this study into at least 2 weeks. And so we'll be covering all of John chapter 9. But today I'm going to focus on verses 1 through 12. And so if you've got your Bibles open, John chapter 9, verse 1. Now, as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus answered, Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. When he had said these things, he spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva. And he anointed the eyes of the man born blind with the clay. And he said to him, Go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. Therefore the neighbors and those who had previously seen him, that he was blind, said, Is this not he who sat and begged? Some said, This is he. Others said, He's like him. He said, I am he. Therefore they said to him, How were your eyes opened? He answered and said, A man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, Go to the pool of Siloam and wash. So I went, I washed, and I received sight. And they said to him, Where is he? He said, I do not know. So here we have one of the great miracles in the Bible. Now, I don't know if you realize, but you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, Jesus does hundreds of miracles. When you get to the Gospel of John, Jesus only does 7 miracles. And he tells us that he gives us these 7 miracles to highlight the power of Jesus' ministry. He said, and you read in John chapter 20, verse 30, And truly Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written. He said, I've given you the 7 that I give you, that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you might have life in his name. So he's saying, I've given you these 7 miracles that your faith might be strengthened, that you might have evidence on which to hang your faith. Now, if you're wondering what those 7 miracles are, 1, Jesus changes the water into wine. He heals a nobleman's son. He heals a lame man by the pool. He feeds 5,000. He walks in water. What we're studying today is miracle number 6. He heals one who is born blind. Number 7, raises Lazarus from the dead. And I guess you could argue that number 8 would be he raises himself. But that's not really one he performs on somebody else. So those are the 7 miracles, and we're going to talk about this miracle today. A miracle where the eyes of the blind are open, but not just someone who struggles with blindness, but somebody born blind. Now, just think about that for a moment. If you lose your sight, you know, after you're 2 or 3 years old or 10 years old, and you at least have a concept of what a circle is, what a square is, what a person looks like, what's a tree, what's a cloud, what's the stars, what's the sun, what does a house look like, what is a dog and a cat. There's so many things we just take for granted. If you're born blind, you have none of these concepts to gauge your thinking. Most of us, if you close your eyes right now and I start telling you about a yellow monkey that's climbing up a barber pole and he's got some purple ice cream, and you can picture that in your mind. As crazy as it is, you could picture it. You will fill in the blanks. But if you've never seen a monkey, you don't know what a yellow monkey looks like. And so much just doesn't make any sense when you've never seen anything. Because sight is undoubtedly one of the most important, if not the most important sense. I understand that in most creatures, that when an embryo is developing, one of the first organs that becomes evident is the eye. Begins to show. Here's a few amazing facts about eyes. You blink about 28,000 times a day. each one lasting only 1/10 of a second. The body uses this reflex to keep the eyes clean and lubricated. And this is very important when you consider 90% of the information that comes into your brain comes through the medium of your eyes. Furthermore, your eyes come into your brain, are able to compute a scene that comes into your brain in 1/100th of a second. Your eyes focus on 50 different objects every second. It's the only organ that is more complex. The only organ more complex than the eye is your brain. Matter of fact, even Charles Darwin said the eye makes it very difficult for him to believe in evolution. A trained eye can distinguish about 10 million different colors. Your eye can detect a candle flame 1.7 miles away. Your iris, the colored part of your eye, has 256 unique characteristics. Your fingerprint only has 40. That's why they're using more and more iris recognition software to know that it's you and not somebody else. Only 1/6 of your eyeball is actually visible. We hope you keep it that way today. Heterochromia is the medical term for having two different colored eyes. We've probably all met people before. They got like one brown eye, one blue eye, or one green eye, one blue eye. Your eyes are comprised of rods and cone cells. Rods allow you to see shapes, while the cones are responsible for deciphering colors. Do you know the shark cornea is nearly identical to the human cornea and has been used in human eye surgery? The optic nerve contains more than 1 million nerve cells. Your eye is the fastest contracting muscle in the body. It can contract in less than 1/100th of a second. And the average person blinks 12 times a minute, and I bet you just blinked thinking about it. Now, we're going to be dealing with the difficult subject, blindness, and even when you talk about this, there are some blind people listening, and you want to be sensitive, but it is a serious subject, and yet I think that even blind people can have a sense of humor. I remember hearing a story about Bob Hope had a good friend. His name was Charles Boswell, who was a blind golfer. Now, it's hard to imagine a blind golfer, but Charles Boswell, he lost his sight in World War II trying to rescue a person from a burning tank. Tank exploded, lost his vision. He went through the veteran therapy, and finally, after he kind of made his way around, they said, you need to take up a hobby or a sport. He tried different things. He'd never tried golfing before. He tried golfing. And what they did is they had a caddy or an assistant that would say, all right, here's your club, there's the ball, you got to see if you can hit the ball, and the hole is this far away, there's this kind of turf, this kind of ground. I don't know how you can have a blind golfer, but I guess they had a league of blind golfers, and this guy was pretty good. He was a champion. And he actually started a foundation. He became a very successful insurance agent, and he was friends with Bob Hope, the famous comedian. And one time he and Bob Hope were at a dinner where they were raising funds for this foundation, and he's sitting up on the platform at a table, and Bob Hope is at the microphone, and Bob Hope began to tease Charles Boswell. He says, a blind golfer, that's so hard to understand. He said, I'd like to play you a game sometime. And Charles shouted out, he said, I'd be happy to play you a game, Mr. Hope. And Bob Hope said, well, now you don't know, but he says, when I play golf with someone, I usually put a little money down to make it interesting. And he said, that'd be fine with me. I'd like to earn a little money. And Bob Hope said, well, Charles, how many points would you like me to spot you to make it fair? He said, no, man on man, we're going to go even. And Bob Hope said, really? I stand a chance to win a little money. He says, when do you want to do it? Charles said, tonight at midnight. So there's a couple of ways a person can be blind. A person can be blind because you're in the world and you have no eyes to see. And another way a person can be blind is you can have eyes but be in the dark and not have eyes to see with. And so one of the principal lessons in this chapter is Jesus is not just talking about physical sight. He's talking about the light of the world and how so many people in the world are living in darkness because we are born blind. We are born lost. We are born handicapped by sin. And some people have no idea how blind they are. So, blindness is mentioned about 100 times in the Bible. And even in the law of Moses, there was a curse pronounced on anybody who mistreated a blind person. And when they entered the promised land, they were to shout across the mountains to each other, Deuteronomy 27, verse 18, "Cursed is the one who makes the blind to wander off the road." And all the people will say, "Amen." So the Jewish nation was very sensitive that you should care about blind people and be sensitive to that. Of your 5 senses, your vision seems to be the most important. It seems like that if you have other senses that you lose, the one sense people would hate to lose is the sense of sight. But if you lose your sight, all the other senses seem to be enhanced. Now, bats are known for having incredible hearing. Some bats actually have good eyes, but many of them have bad eyes, but great hearing. They can hear at night with echolocation. Dogs can find the way around with their nose. Raccoons have an incredible sense of feeling, so do spiders. Catfish have the best sense of taste. Now, humans depend almost entirely upon our sight to get around and to be safe. The world, the Bible tells us, is in a state of darkness. Isaiah 60, verse 2, "Behold, darkness will cover the earth, and deep darkness the people." And Jesus said in John 3, verse 19, "This is the condemnation that light has come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. For everyone practicing evil hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his deeds should be exposed. But he who does the truth, he comes to the light, that his deeds might be clearly seen, that they have been done in God." So you're going to see all the way through the Bible, light is compared with truth, darkness is compared with ignorance or evil. You can read, for instance, in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 17, "This I say, therefore, and testify in the Lord, that you should no longer walk as the rest of the Gentiles walk, in futility of their mind, having their understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the blindness in their heart." Jesus talked about if the blind lead the blind, they will all fall in the ditch. There's a lot of blindness in the world, spiritual blindness. 2 Corinthians 4, verse 3, "But even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled from those who are perishing, whose mind the God of this age," meaning the devil, "has blinded, who do not believe, lest the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine on them." The devil has blinded much of the world, Paul says. Isaiah 42, matter of fact, Isaiah 42, several places, talks about vision and sight. Verse 6, "I, the Lord, have called you in righteousness and will hold your hand. I will keep you and give you as a covenant of the people, as a light to the Gentiles, to open blind eyes." Now, don't forget that. They often said that the Gentiles are living in darkness because they do not know the true God. This story we're about to study talks about Jesus giving light to the Gentiles. "To bring out prisoners from the prison, those who sit in darkness from the prison house." Isaiah 42:16. "I'll bring the blind by a way they did not know. I will lead them in paths they have not known. I will make darkness light before them and the crooked places straight. These things I will do for them and not forsake them." Isaiah 42:18. "Hear, you deaf, and look, you blind, that you may see. Who is blind but my servant? Or deaf as my messenger, whom I send? Who is blind as he who is perfect, and blind as the Lord's servant?" In some ways, the Bible says that God will hide his eyes from our sins. And so blindness had to do with a spiritual understanding. Now, I want you to go to this story that we're looking at in John chapter 9, but to understand the context, it's always good to go back a verse or two. What is happening in John chapter 8? If you got your Bible, just turn real quick to, let's see, John chapter 8. And if you look in verse 54, Jesus is having a dispute with the scribes and Pharisees, and he says, "If I honor myself, my honor is nothing. It's my Father who honors me, whom you say that he is your God, that you don't know him, but I know him. And if I say I don't know him, I'll be a liar like you. but I know him, and I keep his word. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and saw it, and was glad. And the Jews said to him, You're not yet 50 years old, and have you seen Abraham? And Jesus said in those famous words, Most assuredly I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. And who else said, I am? God said to Moses, I am that I am. There's more I ams that Jesus declares in John than anywhere else. He says, I am the door. I am the light of the world. I am the living water. I am the good shepherd. They understood that he was claiming divinity because it tells us they took up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple, going through the midst of them. So he's been in the temple. He goes out of the temple, through the midst of them, and so passed by. What did he do? He passed by. Now I start with John chapter 9. Now Jesus, as he passed by. So this story takes place immediately following an assassination attempt. They had just taken up stones to stone him, but he blinded them so they couldn't see him, and he passed through their midst. But he has not lost his care for the people around him. As he's passing out of the temple where they were just getting ready to stone him, this event takes place. Now, as Jesus passed by, he saw. Now, the blind man did not see Jesus, but Jesus saw him, because God sees all things, right? Does Jesus see us? He saw a man who was blind from birth. Now, Christ knows all things, and he knew that. The Bible says Jesus saw these people that were suffering by the pool of Bethesda, but he saw one man that he knew had been there 38 years. And his heart went out to him. He saw this man who had never seen anything, and his heart was moved. He saw him. And he pauses to look at him, and they must have been discussing it. And maybe the disciples had some insight, or maybe he's holding a sign up, Please help me, I've been blind from birth. We don't know, but somehow they knew this man was blind from birth. And the disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Now, you know what's interesting? They don't say, who sinned that man? They say, this man, which indicates that they're not far away from the man. Now, he may be blind, but are his ears working? So can he hear them talking like this? As a matter of fact, if you're blind, your hearing is probably a little bit better. And so they hear him asking this question. Who is it that sinned that he would be born blind? Now, as we dive off into this subject today, I've divided the study into 7 parts. And I tried to make it easy to remember. You've got first the wondering, the working, the washing, the walking, the witnessing, the wandering, and the worshiping. It starts out wondering, it ends up worshiping at the end of the chapter, and we'll get to that part next week. But let's first look at the wondering. So they're asking Jesus, why was this man born blind? Whose sin was it? Now, he's just escaped the stoning in the temple. And they're very quick to judge this man and say, well, you know, somebody sinned. Now, you might be thinking, what's wrong with the disciples? How could they be asking, is this man blind because of his sin? Was he born blind because of his sin? How do you work that out? Do you sin in vitro? So that and because you kicked too much in your mother's womb, you're born blind? I mean, how do you get punished? Or maybe they had been influenced by some of the Greek thinking that the soul existed and it was conscious and somehow it was a bad soul, and in its reincarnation, it's true that, the Greeks had occupied the Jews, and some of their Greek philosophy about the soul's pre-existence had actually influenced some of the Jews. They were called the Hellenists. They were influenced a lot by the Greek culture. And maybe that thinking had contaminated the disciples' theology. And they're saying, did this man somehow sin prior to his birth? Or was it his parents' sin? And then again, there's the possibility that, all Jews believe that anyone who's suffering is suffering because of their sin or the sin of their parents. Not necessarily those who are born with a problem. But really, there is some truth to it. Is there any suffering in the world that can't be traced to sin? All suffering in the world can be connected to sin in general, right? If Adam and Eve had not fallen in sin, there'd be no suffering in the world. And so they understand that. And then they read the place in the Bible where it talks about the sins of the fathers are visited upon the children under the third and fourth generation. That's in the Ten Commandments. It's the second commandment. The sins of the fathers, it says God visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generation of those that hate me, but showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandment. What does that mean? That verse is often misunderstood. See, the Bible's really clear. The Father does not bear the iniquity of the Son, and the Son does not bear the iniquity of the Father. The righteousness of the righteous will be upon him, and the wickedness of the wicked will be upon him. And there are these wicked guards who assassinated a king. And when his son finally came into power, he said, I am going to kill the assassins, but I'm not going to kill their children because they are not responsible for the sins of the fathers. The Bible's very clear. Children are not responsible for the sins of the parents. What does it mean in the Ten Commandments where it says the sins of the fathers are visited on the children? When it says fathers there, it doesn't mean daddies and mommies. The fathers were the leaders. Whether they're the priests or the kings, they were called the fathers of a nation. Have you noticed in the Bible that when the king went south spiritually, the whole nation went south? When the high priest compromised like Eli and his sons, the whole nation suffered. And so when the leaders misled the people, those judgments often suffered, the people suffered as a result of that. But God is very clear. The soul that sins, they shall die. Children are not responsible for the sins of the parents, and parents are not responsible for the sins of the children. And I'll tell you, everybody today is kind of preoccupied with their ancestry. I'm curious, how many of you have had an ancestry test? I have, so I'll just help you come out of the closet if you have. Anybody? Come on, fess up. Anybody? Yeah, okay, some of you had it. My kids bought it for me, so I did it, and it was actually very disappointing because all of my life, my father and my uncles all told us that we were part Cherokee. They said, yeah, we're part Indian. And I played on that my whole life. They all said it. I believed it. Yeah, your great-grandma was full-blood Cherokee from Oklahoma. And so I got the test. Not a drop of Native American blood. I mean, I'm still recovering from that letdown. But I found out I am part Indian from India. So I think they just got mixed up about which, like Columbus did, they got mixed up about which Indian it was. But everyone's preoccupied with, they say, the reason I've got problems with a temper is because, part Irish, red hair, I can't help it. It's my ancestry. Have you noticed that everybody likes to blame their problems on their ancestry? At least it used to be that way. Now they blame the problems on my ancestry. You know what I'm talking about? Everybody's blaming somebody for their problems, and no one really owns it. Everyone's a victim these days. So, who sinned? This man or his parents, that he would be born blind. And Jesus had to set them straight on this. They all want to blame somebody. Do you know that all of us when we realize what Jesus said next, it's going to be, I think, very liberating for us. Christ answered, neither this man, this is in John chapter 9, verse 3, neither this man nor his parents sinned. Now, Christ is not saying his parents were sinless because all have sinned and fallen from the glory of God. Jesus is just saying it was not due to this man's sins or his parents' sin. Now, it is true sometimes because of the sins of a parents, if parents do not live right, they can actually have a child that will have some deformity. And do you know, it is true that there are certain kinds of blindness that can be caused by venereal disease. And so they knew that back then. They said, was it the sin of the parents that caused them to be born blind? And so, if parents have very bad health habits or something, they can pass something on to their children. I used to always wonder, my mother and my father were fairly healthy, but my brother was born with cystic fibrosis. I was born healthy. I used to always ask, why? Well, why? It just didn't seem fair. I just kind of always felt guilty that I was so healthy, and And it used to bother my brother too. He used to say, it's not fair, Doug, that I'm so smart and I'm sick and you're so healthy and you're stupid. But so we always want to know why. Who do we blame? And so Jesus is saying neither. But why? That the works of God should be revealed in him. Now we're getting into the working part of the message. Notice just in this verse. He said, but the works of God should be revealed in him. I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Now notice he emphasizes the words, I am the light of the world. Then he performs a miracle. But before he says that, he makes something very clear. It's not this man's sin. It's not the sin of his parents. But that the works of God should be revealed in him. Now, you may be going through a trial and wondering, why am I going through this trial? Maybe you have some friends around you like Job's comforters. You know, the whole book of Job is written because it's dealing with the question, Job is going through all this suffering, and everybody's assuming Job is suffering because of his sin. And all of the dialogue and the debate and the discussion in the book of Job is basically saying, Job is saying, look, no, I've been serving God. I've been faithful to God. And they're saying, oh man, you not only are you wicked, you're proud. And his friends who are supposed to be there to comfort him saying, you know, the curse causeless does not come. If you are suffering under this obvious curse, all this calamities befalling you, you must have some terrible sin that you've done, because God will not send suffering on someone unless they deserve it. No, the Bible doesn't teach that. Why is it Elijah goes to heaven in a fiery chariot, and Elisha has a double portion of Elijah's spirit, but he dies from a lingering sickness? Sometimes, why did, John the Baptist, who's called the greatest prophet, why does he die beheaded alone in a prison? And so people ask these questions. Have you ever wondered, why was I not given certain advantages? Why was I born with some defect, some congenital problem? You know, you could always answer the question by saying, God must have a purpose. God can be glorified in it. And you might be thinking, well, that doesn't seem fair that he should have to live. Maybe he was a young man. His parents had to kind of testify that he was old enough to testify for himself. So he may have been 20 years old, was typically the age when you're considered an adult, old enough to fight in the army. So he's a young man. He spent 20 years of his life blind. And you mean Jesus would let him suffer that for his glory? Martha and Mary, they asked Jesus, why did you let your friend Lazarus die? You know what Jesus said? That you might see the glory of God. What's the purpose for your existence? Why do we exist? For the glory of God. I know that when I first heard that, I thought, well, that sounds like God's being sort of self-centered. But you are created for the glory of God, and when you recognize what the purpose of your existence is, that's when you find your greatest happiness, because you were designed for that. The devil, the whole reason sin is in the world is because the devil thinks that the purpose of life is to glorify him. He rebelled against God. He said, neither this man sinned, nor his parents, but that I might work the work of him who sent me. While it is day, the night is coming when no man can work. By the way, friends, that's true right now. Right now, we have a certain amount of freedom to preach the gospel. It's not always going to be that way. I think the night is coming when no one can work. Romans chapter 8:28, we know that all things work together for the good of those who love God. And you might be suffering and wondering why you're going through a trial. And God is saying it's going to be for his glory in the end. I don't know how long that's going to last. Paul had some malady. Some people wonder if it was his eyesight. And Paul prayed 3 times about this thorn the devil was using to torment him. And Paul had raised the dead. He had healed the sick. And he says, Lord, I've got this medical problem. Can you heal me? He prayed 3 times and God said no. 3 times. And Paul finally said, my strength is going to be made perfect in weakness. it was for the glory of God that Paul was never healed on earth of his problem. Now, if you're a Christian, you realize you're all going to get healed. You will all be healed someday. Whatever your problem is, and when it happens, you're going to be so happy. And when 1,000,000 years go by in heaven and you've got your glorified body, are you going to be thinking, why, Lord, did you let me suffer 20 years on earth? You see, you get the eternal perspective and you're going to realize it's our momentary affliction, Paul calls it. It is a momentary affliction prepared for what God has for us. How long was Joseph in prison? For years. Why? Joseph said, God allowed this for the glory of God. The suffering of Job. Job was double blessed in the end. The resurrection of Lazarus. It magnified the glory of God, the love of God, and the power of God. And that's why Jesus said, John 11, verse 40, he said, did I not tell you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God? Can you imagine how happy they were? Did they remember the pain of Lazarus' sickness when they saw the resurrection? No. It was all forgotten. You know, sometimes God has to do hard things to make things better. I got into a fight when I was a kid in New York City in Central Park, and a kid punched me square on the nose, broke my nose. And for a good part of my adult life, you haven't seen it because it was repaired since then, my nose was cocked dramatically off to one side. I looked like a boxer. And I finally went to the doctor, and I was struggling to breathe. He says, well, the reason you can't breathe, you got a deviated septum, your nose has been broken. I said, what can you do? He said, I think I can help you. So what's that involved? He said, I got to break your nose. I said, what? He says, well, you want me to fix it? I said, yeah. Is it going to hurt? He said, not very much. And so he said, you know, in order to get it where you can breathe again, I got to break it again. So I'm glad I did it. I wasn't real glad at the moment. And this is the way God works sometimes. In order to heal us, He's got to break us. He's got to take us through trials. He might have to bind us and blind us and send us through all kinds of difficulty, but He's doing it because He loves us. And He wants us to help other people see. Acts 26, this is one of the great verses that I'm going to share today. Acts 26:17. Now this is Jesus speaking to Paul after Paul has had his vision of Christ. By the way, what happened to Paul when he saw Christ? Paul thought he had great theological insight. He saw Jesus on the road to Damascus. He was blinded by the light. Paul thought he had light, and all of a sudden now he's in darkness. He spent 3 days praying. Ananias came, laid his hands on Paul, prayed for Paul that he might receive his sight, and something like scales fell from his eyes. It's almost like his cornea had been singed or something, fell off and he could see. And Jesus said, Acts 26:17, I will deliver you from the Jewish people as well as from the Gentiles, to whom I now send you, to open their eyes in order to turn them from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God, that they might receive forgiveness of sins and an inheritance among those who are sanctified by faith in me. That is a great verse. The whole gospel is to turn us from darkness to light, from the power of Satan, so you're not controlled by a life of sin, to the power of God, that we might receive forgiveness of our sins and an eternal inheritance in heaven by being sanctified through Christ. The whole gospel is in that verse, and it's in the context of going from blindness to sight. You know, one of the only curses that Paul ever pronounced is somebody was turning, this man who was a false prophet named Bar-Jesus was turning the proconsul Sergius Paulus away from hearing the gospel. Paul turned to him and he said, you son of the devil. He says, you are going to be stricken with blindness. And Paul blinded him. Do you know, the Bible tells about Elisha praying that his servant's eyes would be open so he could see beyond the spiritual veil. They were being attacked by the Syrians, and they were surrounded. It looked like no way of escape, and the servant of Elisha says, my master, alas, what shall we do? And Elisha, very relaxed, he says, Lord, please open his eyes. And the eyes of the servant were open. He saw that surrounding the Syrian army on the mountains, they were full of chariots and horses of fire. You've heard that expression before? That's where it comes from. The chariots of fire, the angels of God encamped round about those that fear him. And then Elisha said, when the army came to attack, he said, Lord, strike this army with blindness. And the whole army was blinded. Wouldn't you like to see that? And Elisha said to the captain of the enemy, he says, I know who you're looking for. Let me take you there. And he takes a hold of the lead horse, and he leads his whole army into the capital city of Samaria. Boy, that's going to be one of those great heavenly videos I want to check out. I want to watch that. And then after he leads them all into the city, the Syrian contingent that had come to arrest Elisha, he then says, now, Lord, open their eyes. See, God doesn't want us to be blind permanently. Then the Syrian army's eyes are open. Now they're the ones surrounded instead of being the surrounders. A great story in the Bible. The Bible has a lot to say about opening the eyes of the blind. You know, it's interesting that in this story we're studying today, Jesus takes a man who has never seen and he opens his eyes. When the disciples begin to do their work, Peter and John go to the temple. By the way, this was probably near the temple gates. Didn't we read Jesus had just gone out of the temple when this happened? The beggars used to be in the gates. Peter and John are coming in the temple gates, and they heal a man who has never walked because they've got the power of Christ. Something else I thought I should mention is many of the ancient church fathers, when they studied this story, they said it's not an accident that Jesus walks away from the religious leaders that want to stone him when he says, I am. And then he goes to a man who has never seen after walking out of the temple and opens his eyes. He says, this is a symbol, it's a type, a metaphor for Christ, who was not only to give the light to the Jewish nation, but then open the eyes of the Gentiles. We just read that in the prophecies of both Jesus to Paul and in Isaiah. So he comes to the man then, and now we get into the walking aspect of the study. It says, now after Jesus says, I am the light of the world, then he does something about it. He says, I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Now he does something about it. He goes to work. He didn't say, that Jesus just tried to stone me, I'll come back and meet you another time. Christ did not pass by somebody in need. And when he said these things, he knelt down by the man, and the man must have heard Jesus' name because the disciples were addressing him, because later they asked the man what was his name. He knows his name. And so he knows who it is. Maybe he's heard about Jesus, but he doesn't know very much, as you'll see when we continue our study. Jesus kneels down and he spits on the ground, and he takes the spittle and he mingles it with the dust on the ground, and he makes this mud, this clay, and he gently spreads it over the eyes. And you would normally think, is that going to help your vision, or is that going to obscure it even more? If you close your eyes, you can see a little light, but if people put mud on your eyes after that, it's going to be really hard. He puts mud on his eyes and says, now go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. Any of you, when you were young, did you ever have like a mother or grandparent that tried to clean your face with spit? Now, when I was little, one of the first things you learn when you're little is if something comes out of your body, you don't play with it or put it on you. It's icky, you stay away from it. And so I had that deeply ingrained in me when I was very young. And it used to be so mortifying for me that if I was with my grandmother in public and she looked down and saw I had some dirt on my face, she would lick her thumb or spit on a Kleenex or a hanky that she always seemed to be able to pull out of her purse and wash my face with her spit. Anyone else? Am I only one abused this way when I was young? And so when I read this story about Jesus putting spit on someone's face, I'm thinking, oh, Lord. But you know what? Technically, anything that came out of a person was unclean. Any issue from the body was considered unclean. Blood was considered unclean. But the blood of Jesus washes sin. And even the spit of Jesus can be better than the balm of Gilead to open eyes. Because Jesus, when he came to a person who was unclean, when he touched an unclean person, instead of Jesus becoming unclean from contact, he transferred his cleanliness to that person. And by the way, how did God first make man? From the dust of the ground. God made clay, and he formed man. So this is almost like recreation that's taking place here. So he used spit. You know, there's 3 times in the Bible Jesus used spit to heal. There was a man who was dumb. It says he spat, Mark 7. There were 2 blind men. And the crowd, of course, spat on Jesus to humiliate him. You can read in Mark 8, he took a blind man by the hand, led him out of town. When he had spit on his eyes, he put his hands upon him and asked him how he saw. And first he saw men like trees walking, and then he touched him again, and he was healed and saw everything clearly. Is there any limit to the ways that God can heal in the Bible? Let's think about it. Did God sometimes use water to heal? He told this man, go wash in the pool of Siloam. What did Elisha say to Naaman? Go wash in the Jordan. Did Jesus use oil? What does it say in James about oil and healing? The Bible tells us that handkerchiefs. Have you read in the Bible where it says that they took handkerchiefs from the apostles and they'd lay it upon people? The Bible tells us they would bring people out into the street that the shadow of Peter might pass over them and they could be healed. The Bible tells us that they used clay. Hezekiah was healed by what? A lump of figs. Jesus could speak a word. It might be a touch. I mean, there's several different methods that God used in the Bible to heal. And I was reading the book Desire of Ages. Jesus was also doing this to basically say, if you don't have a clinic at hand, use whatever's available. This cure could be wrought only by the power of the great healer, yet Christ made use of the simple agencies of nature. He sanctioned the use of simple and natural remedies. Clay. There's something to be said for a mud bath, I suppose. And then you read on, it says, he tells him to go to the pool of Siloam. Now, I've actually been to that pool. Do you know that pool is still there today? Let me tell you a little story about it. Outside of Jerusalem, there was a spring called Gihon. It was a very strong spring. During the time of Hezekiah, they were worried when the Assyrians were threatening to besiege the city of Jerusalem. Hezekiah said, we don't want to get stuck so that we can't have water in the city. Because you can last a long time without food. You can't last very long without water. Hezekiah said to his engineers, any way we could take the water from Gihon that's outside of the city and bring it inside the city. And they did some calculating. They said, it's a lot of work, but we can do it. And you can read about this in the Bible. They then dug down inside Jerusalem, and they dug through solid rock. It must be a mile. It seems like a kilometer. Outside the city, they connected with the source for the Gihon spring, and it's amazing. They had excavating teams that were digging from the spring and others who were digging from Jerusalem. Now, the reason I know this is Karen and I, when we were in Israel, we got there a few days before the rest of the group, and she and I and 2 friends from Australia, we went to Hezekiah's tunnel. It's still there today. It's still bringing water today from the spring of Gihon into the pool of Siloam, and people are still going down there today, and you can use that water. It's amazing, and I'll tell you, it's really, for me, it was the high point of the trip. We were in the tunnel of Hezekiah by ourselves. They said, yeah, there it is, go ahead. And we're walking off, there's no lights. We're using our camera lights. And you're walking in water that goes somewhere between your ankles up above your knees, and it's very cold, and you're in the dark, and you're walking through this very narrow tunnel. Got a duck, you'll hit your head if you're not careful. Ask me how I know. And you're actually walking through history. You say, the Bible is true. This is the tunnel. You can read about it in the Bible that Hezekiah built this tunnel to bring water inside the city. That water came to the pool of Siloam. The word Siloam is a Greek way of saying Shiloh. You remember what it tells us in the Bible about Shiloh? Read in Genesis 49. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver between his feet until Shiloh comes. This pool of Siloam is a type of Christ. Read also Isaiah chapter 8, verse 6. Inasmuch as these people have refused the waters of Siloah, that's the spring, the pool of Siloam, that flows softly. And they rejoice in Rezin and Remaliah, his son. He says, you're going after the gods of the Assyrians and Israel instead of the doctrines of living water. This pool was a type of Christ, the living water. So when Jesus sends them to this pool, which is called sent, he's basically sending them to the living water, like he told that woman at the well in chapter 4. In the same way that Elisha told Naaman to go wash and be clean, it says, it's very simple. After you've got the walking. Now, did this man have something to do in order to be cleansed? He did. Jesus said, I will do this. I'm going to work a miracle for you, but you have a part to play. You go and you wash. Now, it doesn't say Jesus led him by the hand. If you're a blind man and you've got to go to a location in Jerusalem, blind people drink. He probably knew where it was. He may have had a cane. He may have found a friend that said, hey, can you take me to the pool? But somewhere he made the effort to go to the pool. He could have said, this is crazy. I don't appreciate your spitting on my eyes. I can hear you spit. I know what you're doing. That wasn't very nice. But this man, he receives it. His spirit is touched by the compassion of Christ, and he obeys what otherwise might seem like a ridiculous request. I have never seen in my life. You're telling me you're going to spit, put mud on my eyes, I'm going to see. But he acts in faith. Simple, childlike faith. And you know, it was easier for someone blind from birth to believe in the power of Jesus than the theologians in Israel. It was easier for the Gentiles to accept the message of Christ than sometimes the church members. Simple faith. The gospel is really simple. Go wash. And you read in chapter 9, verse 7, this is part B of verse 7, so he went, he obeyed, and he washed, and he came back seeing. Now, friends, you just got to stay with me for a minute. I'm almost done with today. So he stumbles along. He goes down the long flight of steps. I showed you the pool. You got to go down to it. And someone leads him up, and maybe they got a hold on him so he doesn't fall off in the water because he's blind after all. And he leans over and he splashes the water up on his face and washes the clay off. He does it a few times, rinses it thoroughly away. And then he flutters his eyes open, and like an explosion, like a shock, light just comes booming into his mind. And he can see. But I'd like to suggest something I can't prove, but I believe. You know, they say that a child, when it's young, there's a part of your brain that controls your sight. And as your eyes are developing and focusing, and, you know, when babies are real little, it's like they don't see nothing. You know, they're looking around and they can't see. And pretty soon they start recognizing objects. You hang a little mobile above their crib and they start pretty soon swatting it, and they look and they're amazed at everything they see. They got that look of wonder at everything they see. And then they get a little older and they see something funny and they laugh. They start recognizing that's funny, and then you know they really see. But for a person who's never seen, they say that there's doctors that can perform surgery on people who have never seen, and sometimes they, even though their eyes are perfectly healthy, the part of their brain that processes sight has gone too far and they never can understand what they're seeing. Now there are some. Up until 1786, I think, was the first time a surgeon performed surgery on a person who had never seen and restored their sight. But up until that time, that had never happened before. This is a first-class miracle. But I believe, here's a theory that you may disagree with. When Adam was made, did God send Adam from the factory where he already understood what he was looking at? Did Adam already know how to talk? God didn't have to train or program Adam. I think Adam came from the hands of God. Did he have to learn to walk, or did he already know how to balance himself? I think Adam already knew how to speak. I think God created him right from the Creator's hand with certain abilities intact. I think that Jesus, when he healed this man, he not only gave him healing, I think he gave him recognition, because he would have spent weeks trying to figure out, what's that? That's a rock. That's a rock. What's that? That's a person. That's a woman. That's a woman. I mean, all these things. He'd never seen these things before. He'd never seen shapes, never seen color. So I think Jesus not only healed him, I think when his eyes were open, all of a sudden he was given a gift of recognition at the same time. But still, can you imagine the wonder? Seeing for the first time, being able to behold these things. And it happened after he washed. After he washed, he saw. And you know, the Bible tells us at the baptism of Jesus, Matthew 3:16, when he had been baptized, behold, the heavens were opened, and he saw. Do you know, with the baptism of Christ, it talks about seeing and hearing. And I think that people see and hear in a new way when we are washed by God. Paul, when God prayed for him, scales fell from his eyes, and he saw. Now, Jesus did not put money in his pockets. He did not give him a wheelchair or a cane because of his blindness. He gave him eyes, and he set him free. Was he happy? Even though he was born blind. Could Jesus help him? You know, we are all born blind. We're all born with sin. Now, if you can go through the rest of your life and say, I did not ask to be born with these sinful, evil, selfish tendencies. God, it's all your fault. You made me this way. Or it's because of my parents, Adam and Eve. Why did you do this? And then transfer that selfish DNA on to my parents. The children of Israel did not ask to be born slaves in Egypt. They were there because of a decision their parents made. But you can get out of Egypt if you want. God has made a way for you to see if you want. Christ has provided his blood to wash away our sin. He's provided the mud and the clay to open our eyes so all of us might see. And, you know, for me, this is an especially wonderful story because I know what it feels like going through life not knowing about God, not knowing where I came from, what I'm doing here, where I'm going. You know how empty and hopeless it is to live a life without purpose? How many people out there have no idea what the purpose of life is? They don't know why they're here. They're miserable. They're unhappy. They're listening to all the lies of the world to find happiness, and it leaves them feeling just shattered and broken. Then you find out the truth. And in Jesus and in the Bible, you find out where I came from, what I'm doing here, and where I'm going. That's called vision. You're able to see. I remember reading an incredible story about a man named Bob Edens. He was blind for his whole life, 51 years. He felt his way through life. And then a skilled surgeon performed a complicated operation. He was one of those his brain was able to catch up with what the surgeon did for his eyes. And he says he was overwhelmed. Some of the things, and this is a quote, he said, I never would have dreamed that yellow is so yellow. He exclaimed, I don't have words. I'm amazed by yellow, but red is my favorite color. I just can't believe red. I can see the shape of the moon, and it's like, I like nothing better than seeing a jet plane flying across the sky, leaving a vapor trail. And of course, the sun rises and the sun sets at night, and I look at the stars in the sky and the flashing light. You can never know how wonderful everything is to see. Can you imagine seeing for the first time stuff we just take for granted? Some of you see perfectly and you're still unhappy. Think about that. Similar but a little different. There's a true story about a woman named Rose Crawford who was blind for 50 years. She was not born blind. She became blind when she was young. She spent 50 years blind, and they took the bandages off after her eyes were restored, and she gasped. She wept for joy when for the first time in years she saw the dazzling, beautiful world of form and color. It greeted her eyes. The amazing thing about her story is that for 20 years, her blindness was unnecessary. She didn't know they had a surgical technique that could restore her sight. And so she spent 20 years blind, just accepting her blindness when something could have been done. How sad is that? How sad that so many in the world don't come to Jesus to have their eyes open. The Lord tells us that He wants to give us sight. He says, I am the light of the world. And then He opens our eyes, and then He says, you are the light of the world. Let your light shine. And He's called us to do what He told Paul. We are to bring people out of darkness into His marvelous light. That's, by the way, what Peter says. And this is the story of the gospel, how Jesus opens our eyes. And where there is no vision, the people perish. And right now we're in a world, gross darkness covers the earth, friends. Amen? And darkness the people. Never before did the Lord need the church to have our eyes open and then also to go and to be a light in the world.